So it's a kind of it's almost like a deprogramming of sorts that one goes through, where you become aware of the fact that you're using a lens, and it's not just fact or truth, but there's an actual agenda that's shaping how you're looking at something. And that's not the exclusive realm of scientists who experience that. I think in any discipline, and certainly within the food movement, one of my concerns and critiques has been, I don't want a friend or ally supporting my view out of dogma. I want a friend or an ally supporting my view out of their own critical thinking. And sometimes, whether a person agrees or disagrees with us on the basis of dogma can be equally as damaging. And we're seeing that happen right now as a very fearful public in North America who is horrendously underinformed about food production, food systems, and food politics. When they start catching wind of some of what you're saying as a layperson, we go immediately from Seralini showing toxicological effects post 90 days, getting posted around the internet with headlines, stop eating GMOs, they cause cancer. Whether they do or not, we haven't done the science to prove. The truth is scary enough. There's toxicological impact after 90 days. And sometimes that person who's coming from a place of dogma, even if they're on sort of, team slow down the process, can be just as damaging as someone who's ideologically, opposed to any kind of controls on GMOs. What do you think we as a movement can be doing to support and hasten other people's enlightenment on, and I don't mean enlightenment come around to the way that I think, but enlightenment, ask the framing questions and scratch a little bit deeper and ask more of science and certainly more of the corporatocracy around this issue of safety and approach. So like what can we be doing so that, it takes you years to get where you are. What can we do to hasten it so that, next time I have a Kevin Folta on my radar, is there something I can be doing to break through the dogma and help someone recognize what would have been some of the limitations of their own thinking?
I mean, the short answer is question everything, right? There's nothing that comes from science that isn't tainted by some kind of ideological thinking. And so you do have to understand that as the context for science. So, and you should, in the same way you should question, any wealthy media organization. How does it make money from all its media? By basically feeding people stories they want to hear, by doing the needs of, by serving the needs of more powerful players in the system and reaping the benefits. That is basically how science should be understood. And that doesn't mean that individual facts produced by scientists are not true, but it usually does mean that they are, they might not stand up to replication at the very least, but ultimately the story that you hear from scientists may end up being completely backwards to the truth. We've acquired an ideology of genetic determinism, for example, which is very, very powerful in agriculture, which is very, very powerful in human society, but neither of them really stand up to too much scrutiny. But this ideology didn't really exist in the 1970s and 1980s. It's a development of scientific misinformation. So, the whole idea that you get cancer or diabetes or Alzheimer's or Parkinson's disease from your inherited genes when those diseases didn't exist 100 years ago is absurd. But it's the ideology that you'll read on the front page of the New York Times. And there is pretty much no data to support that. And the same thing is true in agriculture, that the genetic determinism thing comes into the whole seed business, right? Like how as a farmer are you supposed to do good farming? You can buy good seeds, or you can buy good chemicals, or you can buy good fertilizers, or you can compost, or you can change your system, or you can grow cover crops. You have a million choices as a farmer. But the genetic determinist ideology is that what really matters is the seed you grow and the seeds you buy from a company. And so the companies have a vested interest in a genetic determinist ideology that makes them the sellers of the most important thing in agriculture. And they have encouraged the funding of research that reflects that back to them. Okay? So scientists used to complain, scientists who remember the good old days when we used to think about agricultural systems used to complain about how much money was being spent on research into the spraying of chemicals and research into seeds that are the products of biotech companies and agribusiness companies. And when there's a million questions in agriculture. And so even when an experiment is done well and is done with the best of intentions by the scientist, it can still be horribly flawed as, if you don't take into account 1,000 other things, then you're not going to be learning much, and you're going to be falling into a framing of agriculture as being all about chemicals and seeds. So you have to be very, very wary of the scientific information that you share with people. And one thing I would say to people is never share information that you don't yourself know to be true. Okay? So, you may read this in the New York Times, you may hear it repeated to do with a scientific experiment, but unless you go back to the very basics of that scientific experiment, you should never share that information with people, because irrespective of the quality of the science behind it, the people who share information also have an ideology, right? They always have an ideology. And, on our nonprofit, we struggle with the idea, everybody wants to have balance in our newspaper reporting. And we don't offer balance, right? We offer what we consider to be the truth, right? And our ideology is that there should be a public interest and somebody should be pushing that forwards. And so we provide as much information as we possibly can that will help the public to understand the bigger context of science and to put what they hear in other places into perspective. But we're not offering balance, and we're not offering a non-perspective. There's no such thing as a non-perspective. And that's true in the media, it's true for journalism, but it's also true for scientists. No scientist has a view from nowhere. All scientists, until 20 years ago, all scientists were white 50-year-old males, right, from European extraction. So they didn't do experiments on female rats. They didn't do experiments that were relevant to people in other countries. They didn't do experiments that were relevant to poor people. And we still haven't remedied those problems in any significant way. But we have to think about what kind of science that produces. And it produces science that benefits 50-year-old white males. This is going to happen. And you have to understand that if you want other people to benefit, you have to offer them a place at the table of science. And so the democratization of science is a huge issue for our society to grapple with. And that's something that I would really encourage people to think hard about. Before you take science seriously, think about how undemocratic the decision-making process was that went into the production of that piece of knowledge.